The mahogany conference room of Blackthorne Acquisitions fell silent as Dr. Emma Whitfield slammed her archaeological assessment onto the polished table. This worthless farmland you've been pressuring her to sell. It's sitting on a Native American burial site containing artifacts worth over $25 million. CEO Harrison Blackthorne's face went ashen as the archaeologist continued, and the woman who inherited it for practically nothing is the same woman whose great-grandmother your company cheated out of these sacred lands 90 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching August sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth of Meadowbrook County, where nothing seemed to thrive except foreclosure notices and faded dreams. For most of the struggling farmers in this forgotten corner of Tennessee, another season of drought meant another step closer to bankruptcy. The old-timers spoke in hushed tones about the curse that had befallen the land since the Cherokee were driven out, how nothing good ever came from soil stained with broken treaties. But for 34-year-old Maya Thompson, standing at the edge of what everyone called the Deadlands, this barren expanse of 75 acres represented something entirely different. A chance to finally understand why her great-grandmother, Rosa, had whispered stories about sacred ground and buried treasures that the white men could never find. Maya wiped perspiration from her dark skin as she studied the property deed in her weathered hands. The paper felt almost mythical after spending 3 months in legal limbo, fighting distant relatives who suddenly appeared when old Aunt Beatrice died, leaving her the land in a will that shocked everyone, most of all Maya herself. "You sure about taking this on, Maya?" asked her neighbor, James Crawford. His weathered face creased with concern. The 70-year-old farmer had watched 3 generations try and fail to make something of this particular plot. "Your aunt tried for 40 years to grow anything here. Even the county gave up trying to develop it. They say it's cursed." "Cursed or not," Maya replied, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had helped her raise 3 children alone after her husband died overseas, "it's mine now. And I've never been one to believe in curses, only in hard work and hidden blessings." The inheritance had come at a time when Maya desperately needed a break. Working 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving breakfast at the truck stop during the day, had barely kept her family afloat. The modest rental house where she lived with her children was falling apart, and the landlord had already warned about raising the rent again. When Aunt Beatrice's lawyer had called with news of the inheritance, Maya's first instinct was to sell. Immediately, 75 acres just outside Meadowbrook, even worthless land, had to be worth something. But when she visited the property for the first time, something had stopped her from calling a realtor. Maybe it was the way the wind seemed to whisper through the sparse grass. Maybe it was how the land felt familiar, despite never having been there before. Or maybe it was the memory of great-grandma Rosa, speaking in mix of English and Cherokee, about the old ways, the sacred places, and the treasures that waited for the right time and the right person. As Maya walked across the uneven terrain, she noticed something odd about the land's topology. While most of the surrounding area was flat farmland, her property had small mounds and depressions that seemed almost intentional. When she mentioned this to her teenage daughter Sarah, who was studying anthropology at the community college, Sarah's eyes had lit up with excitement. "Mom, those could be archaeological features, like really old ones. You know how great-great-grandma always talked about the Cherokee villages that used to be here? What if I'm chasing shadows?" Maya had interrupted, though not unkindly. "I can't afford to get lost in maybes, baby girl. This land needs to pay for itself somehow." But Sarah's enthusiasm had planted a seed. That night, Maya found herself researching the area's history, discovering fragments of stories about Cherokee settlements, about artifacts found during construction projects, about a federal preservation project in the 1980s that had been mysteriously shut down before completion. The more she learned, the more questions arose. Why had Aunt Beatrice never developed this land despite being business savvy enough to accumulate considerable wealth through her other properties? Why did county records show gaps in ownership during certain periods? And why did local Cherokee tribal representatives express unusual interest when word got out about her inheritance? 3 weeks after taking possession, Maya decided to do a preliminary survey of the land herself. She couldn't afford to hire professionals, but she had always been handy with tools and good at solving puzzles. What she found during that first real exploration changed everything. Near the center of the property, in an area where the mounds were most pronounced, Maya discovered what looked like deliberately placed stones forming a pattern. They were partially buried, covered by decades of sediment, but when she carefully brushed away the dirt, markings became visible. She called Sarah immediately. "Honey, I need you to come out here with your camera and that archaeology textbook of yours." When Sarah arrived with her 2 younger brothers in tow, she took one look at the stones and grabbed Maya's arm. "Mum, these look like petroglyphs. Those markings, they're not natural. And look at how they're arranged. This could be a ceremonial site." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That weekend, Maya's small family began a careful excavation. Using hand tools and techniques Sarah had learned from her textbooks, they slowly revealed more of the stone formation. What they found defied their wildest expectations. The stones formed a perfect circle with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story. Within the circle, they discovered what appeared to be a fire pit filled with charcoal so old it crumbled at the touch. And then, glinting in the afternoon sunlight, 16-year-old Michael spotted something extraordinary. Carefully buried, in what would have been the center of the ceremonial space, was a wrapped bundle, preserved by the unique clay composition of the soil. When Sarah delicately unwrapped the outer layer of what appeared to be specially treated hide, they gasped at what lay inside. Pottery shards, unlike anything in the local museum. Stone tools carved with precision that spoke of master craftsmen. And nestled in the very center, a collection of metal work that seemed impossibly sophisticated for what was supposedly a primitive society. "Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and reverence. "I think we just found something that could rewrite the history books. This metalwork, it's techniques that weren't supposed to exist here for another 1,000 years." Maya stared at the carefully arranged artifacts, feeling a connection that went deeper than intellectual curiosity. She thought of great-grandma, Rosa, of the stories about relatives who were keepers of sacred knowledge, about why this particular plot of land had remained undeveloped when everything around it had been stripped and planted. That night, Maya made a decision that would change her life forever. Instead of continuing their amateur excavation, she would contact the professionals, not the county or state officials who might tie things up in bureaucratic red tape, but the Cherokee Nation representatives who had already expressed interest in the land. The next morning, she called Dr. Joseph Crow Feather, the tribal historian who had left his number with Aunt Beatrice's lawyer years ago, asking to be notified if the land ever changed hands. "Ms. Thompson," Dr. Crow Feather said after she explained, "their discovery, my grandmother told me stories about that land, stories passed down for generations about artifacts hidden by our ancestors before the Trail of Tears. Artifacts that were meant to be found when our people were ready to reclaim their heritage. With your permission, I'd like to bring in our own archaeological team." Within 3 days, Dr. Crow Feather arrived with a team of Cherokee archaeologists and a representative from the National Museum of the American Indian. What they found over the next week of careful excavation exceeded even the most optimistic estimates. Dr. Elizabeth Strong Bear, the lead Cherokee archaeologist, couldn't contain her excitement as she presented the preliminary findings to Maya's family. This isn't just a burial site or a simple village location. Based on the sophistication of the artifacts and the ceremonial nature of their placement, this appears to be a sacred archive, a place where the Cherokee preserved their most important cultural and technological knowledge. She gestured to the carefully laid out artifacts, each photographed and catalogued before being moved. The metalwork alone suggests that pre-Columbian Cherokee metallurgy was far more advanced than historians believed. These techniques were thought to have been introduced much later by European contact. The pottery told stories through its intricate designs. Stone tools displayed craftsmanship that challenged assumptions about indigenous technology, but it was the collection of what appeared to be star charts, carved into specially treated leather and stone, that truly stunned the experts. These astronomical calculations are incredibly precise, explained Dr. Maria Gonzalez, an expert in ancient American astronomy who had flown in from the Smithsonian. They show a level of mathematical and observational sophistication that rivals anything from medieval Europe. This single site could revolutionize our understanding of pre-Columbian indigenous sciences. As news of the discovery began to spread through archaeological circles, Maya found herself at the center of something much larger than she had imagined. Universities were offering grants for extended excavation. Museums were discussing potential exhibitions that could tour the world. The Cherokee Nation was speaking about creating a cultural center on the site. But with opportunity came complications. By the end of the second week, as Maya was beginning to grasp the magnitude of what lay beneath her inherited land, she received an unexpected visitor. Victoria Blackthorne, a woman in her 40s, dressed in an expensive suit despite the Tennessee heat, approached Maya's trailer where she had been camping on the property during the excavation. "Ms. Thompson, I'm Victoria Blackthorne from Blackthorne Acquisitions. I understand you've recently inherited this property." Maya immediately felt wary. Something about the woman's overly friendly demeanor and the way she kept looking toward the excavation site set off alarm bells. "I'm not looking to sell," Maya said, before Victoria could launch into what was clearly a prepared pitch. Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Of course, I completely understand the sentimental value, but I wanted to make you aware that Blackthorne Acquisitions has been interested in this particular plot for some time. We have plans for a development project that could be very beneficial for the community, and naturally, we'd be willing to offer well above market value." "Market value for land everyone says is worthless?" Victoria's laugh sounded forced. "Well, land value isn't just about current productivity. Location, future potential, surrounding development plans, all of these factor in. We'd be willing to offer $150,000 for the property. That's more than double what comparable land goes for in this area." Maya's suspicion deepened. If the land was truly worthless, why would anyone offer such a premium? And why now, just as the archaeological significance was becoming clear? "Thank you for the offer," Maya said carefully, "but I'm not interested in selling." Victoria's mask slipped just slightly. "Ms. Thompson, I hope you'll reconsider. This offer won't remain open indefinitely, and I should mention that developing this land on your own could be complicated. There are easement issues, environmental concerns, and various regulations that could make private development quite challenging." The subtle threat was clear, but Maya had faced down predatory landlords and aggressive bill collectors. She wasn't easily intimidated. "I appreciate your interest, but my answer is no." After Victoria left, Maya immediately called Dr. Crow Feather to inform him about the visit. His reaction was swift and telling. Maya, we need to accelerate our timeline. If Blackthorne is involved, this isn't just about land development. The Blackthorne family has a history with Cherokee lands that goes back to the 1830s. Hamilton Blackthorne was one of the individuals who profited most from the forced Cherokee removal. They acquired thousands of acres of traditional Cherokee territory for practically nothing. He paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. There's something else you need to know. We found evidence that this site isn't just a sacred archive. It's one of the hidden safe houses where Cherokee families concealed their most valuable possessions before the forced removal. According to our oral histories, several families buried not just cultural artifacts, but also gold and silver tools, ceremonial objects worth fortunes even by today's standards. Maya felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about archaeological significance anymore. It was about justice delayed for nearly 2 centuries. Over the following days, as the excavation continued, the true scope of the find became clear. The Cherokee team discovered multiple chambers beneath the ceremonial stone circle, each one carefully sealed and preserved. The artifacts found in these chambers painted a picture of a sophisticated society with extensive trade networks, advanced metallurgy, and astronomical knowledge that had been systematically erased from official histories. But the most stunning discovery came on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Strongbear and her team uncovered what appeared to be a hidden vault. Inside, wrapped in specially treated hides and buried in clay pots designed to preserve their contents, was a collection that defied all expectations. Golden torques and armbands inlaid with semi-precious stones, silver bowls etched with star maps, copper tools so precisely crafted that they could have been made yesterday, and in the center of it all, a leather-bound journal written in Cherokee syllabary, chronicling astronomical observations and trade negotiations with civilizations that historians insisted the Cherokee had never contacted. Dr. Gonzalez was practically speechless as she examined the astronomical data. These observations include detailed notes about comets that aren't supposed to appear for another 50 years. How did they know? How did they predict celestial events with such precision without modern instruments? But it was the Cherokee team that understood the true significance of the find. Dr. Crow Feather translated portions of the journal, tears streaming down his face as he read aloud, "To our children's children's children who will find this when the time is right. We hide these treasures not from pride, but from necessity. The white man's greed knows no bounds, but our knowledge and our sacred objects will wait beneath the earth until our people are strong enough to reclaim them. What they call magic, we call science. What they call primitive, we call perfection. Let these artifacts speak the truth of what we were, what we are, and what we will be again." The journal went on to detail not just the location of the artifacts, but the reasoning behind their concealment. Cherokee leaders, knowing that removal was inevitable, had created multiple caches throughout their traditional territory. This site wasn't just one burial, it was part of a network designed to preserve Cherokee culture and wealth for future generations. As they continued reading, the journal revealed something that made Maya's heart race. Great-Grandma Rosa wasn't just Cherokee. She was the granddaughter of one of the keepers, specifically tasked with remembering the locations of the hidden caches. The stories she had told weren't just cultural memories, they were coded instructions, waiting for someone with the right combination of Cherokee blood and legal ownership to unlock them. The estimated value of the artifacts discovered in just the first vault exceeded $25 million, but their cultural significance was immeasurable. These weren't just old objects, they were proof of Cherokee sophistication, evidence of the advanced civilization that had been deliberately erased from history books. As word spread through the archaeological community and the Cherokee nation, Maya found herself at the center of a discovery that could reshape understanding of pre-Columbian America. Major universities were offering fellowships. Museums were proposing partnerships. The Cherokee Nation was discussing establishing a research center on the site, but with recognition came pressure from unexpected sources. County officials suddenly became very interested in Maya's property taxes. State environmental agencies appeared with concerns about disturbing native flora, and Blackthorne Acquisitions wasn't giving up easily. The second offer came just 2 weeks after the first, delivered by Harrison Blackthorne himself, Victoria's father and the company's CEO. This time, the figure was $500,000, more than triple the already generous first offer. "Ms. Thompson," Blackthorne said, his silver hair and expensive suit marking him as a man unaccustomed to hearing no. "I think you may not fully understand the complexities of your situation. Converting this land into a legitimate archaeological site involves years of bureaucracy, environmental impact studies, and infrastructure development. We could spare you all that trouble." Maya, flanked by Dr. Crow Feather and a lawyer the Cherokee Nation had provided, remained firm. "Mr. Blackthorne, this land isn't for sale. Not to you, not at any price." Blackthorne's facade cracked slightly. "Ms. Thompson, my family has significant investments in this region. We understand the local politics, the regulatory environment. Sometimes it's better to work with those who have influence rather than against them." The threat was no longer subtle, but Maya had faced down bigger bullies than Harrison Blackthorne. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Blackthorne?" "Not at all," he replied smoothly, simply pointing out realities. "For instance, did you know that the county is considering reassessing property values in this area? Your tax burden could increase substantially, and there are various environmental regulations that could restrict how you use the land." Dr. Crowfeather stepped forward. "Mr. Blackthorne, perhaps you're unaware that the Cherokee Nation has petitioned for federal protection of this site under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. If approved, the site would be protected from development and outside interference." Blackthorne's mask finally fell away completely. "The Cherokee Nation has no legal standing here. This is private property, and the owners have rights that supersede any cultural claims." He turned back to Maya, his voice coldly professional. "Ms. Thompson, I'll give you 1 week to reconsider our offer. After that, we'll pursue other avenues to resolve this situation." As Blackthorne left, Maya felt a chill despite the summer heat, but she also felt something else, a connection to the ancestors who had hidden these treasures, who had trusted that someday their descendants would be strong enough to protect what was theirs. That evening, as Maya sat around a campfire, with her children and the Cherokee archaeological team, Dr. Strong Bear shared more translations from the journal. The final entry was particularly poignant. "We have done what we can. The white man's law says this land is no longer ours, but the earth remembers. Our ancestors sleep here, and their dreams have power. Those who come with greed will find only accursed ground. But those who come with respect, with Cherokee blood in their veins and love for our people in their hearts, will find treasures beyond gold and silver. They will find the truth of who we were and the strength to speak that truth to the world." Maya looked around the fire at faces that could have been her ancestors. Cherokee archaeologists working to uncover their own history, her children learning about their heritage in ways no classroom could teach, and allies committed to ensuring that this discovery told the story the Cherokee people had been prevented from telling for nearly 2 centuries. She thought about great-grandma Rosa, about the stories that had seemed like fairy tales but were actually coded histories. About Aunt Beatrice, who had never developed this land because she somehow knew it held greater value than any crop could provide, about the unbroken chain of Cherokee women who had preserved this knowledge through removals, assimilation attempts, and generations of oppression. The artifacts were worth millions, but their true value couldn't be measured in dollars. They were proof of Cherokee brilliance, evidence of a civilization that had been virtually erased from history books. They were tools for education, weapons against ignorance, and bridges to a cultural identity that had survived genocide. As the fire crackled and the night sounds of Tennessee surrounded them, Maya made a promise to her ancestors and to her children. Whatever Blackthorne threw at them, whatever legal or bureaucratic obstacles appeared, she would protect this site. She would ensure that the Cherokee story was finally told, that the artifacts were preserved and displayed with the respect they deserved. The worthless land her great-grandmother's stories had led her to was proving to be the most valuable inheritance of all, not for its monetary worth, but for its power to reclaim truth, restore dignity, and provide the Cherokee people with tangible proof of their ancestors' greatness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Blackthorne wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and Maya suspected the real battle was just beginning. But tonight, surrounded by artifacts that had waited over a century to see daylight, she felt the strength of every Cherokee woman who had come before her. The cursed land everyone had warned her about was revealing its true nature. It wasn't cursed, it was blessed, protected by ancestors who had faith that eventually someone would come who could unlock its secrets and share them with the world. Maya Thompson, the simple woman who cleaned offices and served breakfast to truckers, had become the keeper of Cherokee treasures worth millions. But more importantly, she had become the voice of ancestors who had been silenced too long. The sacred archive beneath the Tennessee soil was finally open. Now came the real work, protecting it, studying it, and using it to tell the true story of the Cherokee people. As her daughter Sarah carefully photographed petroglyphs by lamplight, and her sons helped organize pottery shards that were older than their country, Maya knew that her life had just taken a turn that would echo through generations. The woman with Cherokee blood and calloused hands had inherited more than land. She had inherited a mission that connected her to every generation of her people, back to the very beginning, and she would not let them down. The morning after Harrison Blackthorne's visit, Maya woke to find 3 men in expensive suits photographing her property from the road. When she approached them, they claimed to be conducting a routine environmental assessment for the county. Their equipment looked more suited for mineral surveys than environmental studies. Dr. Strongbear pulled Maya aside as the men packed up their gear. "Those weren't county assessors. I recognize the equipment. Ground-penetrating radar, soil, composition analyzers. Someone's conducting their own archaeological survey." Within hours, Maya's phone began ringing with calls from local officials she'd never heard of, suddenly concerned about everything from septic system compliance to fire safety regulations. Each call seemed designed to create problems, to force her into expensive bureaucratic battles she couldn't afford. But the Cherokee Nation was ready for this fight. Dr. Crowfeather introduced Maya to their legal team, lawyers who had spent decades defending tribal interests against corporate encroachment. Sarah Wolf-Dancer, the lead attorney, reviewed the rapidly accumulating paperwork with the grim satisfaction of someone who had seen these tactics before. "This is textbook harassment," she explained to Maya. "They're hoping to overwhelm you with compliance costs and legal fees, make you so desperate that Blackthorne's offer starts looking like salvation." Maya's resolve only strengthened. Working 2 jobs while raising 3 children alone had taught her about endurance. "My great-grandmother survived the Trail of Tears. My grandmother raised 9 children during the Depression. I think I can handle Harrison Blackthorne." The archaeological work continued, despite the mounting pressure. Each day brought new discoveries. that reinforced the site's extraordinary significance. Dr. Gonzalez's team uncovered star maps that accurately predicted celestial events centuries into the future. The metallurgy experts found evidence of techniques that wouldn't be invented in Europe for another 1,000 years. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery came when Dr. Strongbear's team excavated what appeared to be a teaching chamber. Unlike the sacred vaults filled with precious artifacts, this space contained tools for education, three-dimensional star models, mathematical calculation devices, and intricate maps showing trade routes extending from the Arctic to South America. This challenges everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian America, Dr. Strongbear explained to a gathering of international archaeologists who had traveled to witness the site. The Cherokee weren't just sophisticated, they were connected to a continental network of advanced civilizations. The implications rippled through academic institutions worldwide. Harvard offered Maya a visiting fellowship just to have access to the site. The Smithsonian proposed a $50 million exhibition. National Geographic wanted exclusive documentation rights. But the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. Representatives from indigenous peoples across the Americas arrived to witness what Cherokee ancestors had preserved. Mayan astronomers confirmed that the star charts matched their own ancient calculations. Inuit traders recognized route markers showing connections between their ancestors and the Cherokee. Elder Maria Yazzie, a Navajo spiritual leader who had traveled from Arizona, placed her hands on the stone circle and wept. "Your ancestors didn't just preserve Cherokee knowledge," she told Maya. "They preserved the proof that all our peoples were connected, that we shared knowledge and wisdom long before the colonizers came." As word spread, Maya found herself becoming something she never expected, a symbol of indigenous resurgence. Cherokee youth, who had felt disconnected from their heritage, made pilgrimages to the site. Other tribes began sharing their own hidden cache stories, passed down through generations like Rosa's tales. The financial implications were staggering. Conservative estimates placed the cultural and archaeological value at over $50 million. But the Cherokee Nation proposed something unprecedented. Rather than selling artifacts to private collectors or museums, they would create an international indigenous research center on the site. "This land will become a place of learning," Maya announced at a press conference that attracted global media attention. Not just about the Cherokee, but about all indigenous peoples whose brilliance was erased from history books. The announcement sent Blackthorne Acquisitions into overdrive. Victoria Blackthorne appeared at Maya's trailer the next morning, flanked by two men introduced as security consultants. "Ms. Thompson, you're making a terrible mistake," Victoria said, her friendly facade completely abandoned. "You're a cleaning lady and a waitress. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with." Maya stepped outside, closing the trailer door firmly behind her. She'd had enough of threats disguised as concern. "I understand exactly who I'm dealing with, Ms. Blackthorne. Your family has been stealing from mine for nearly 200 years. That ends now." "The Cherokee were savages who didn't even understand property ownership," Victoria snapped, revealing the racism that lurked beneath her corporate polish. "My great-great-grandfather civilized this land." Dr. Strongbear emerged from the excavation area, covered in dust but dignified in her authority. "Miss Blackthorne, would you like to see what your savage ancestors accomplished?" These star charts calculated eclipses with precision that European astronomers couldn't match for another 500 years. "The metallurgy here surpasses anything your ancestors brought from Europe." Victoria's face reddened. "Primitive trinkets won't change the fact that this is a business matter. Blackthorne has invested significant resources in acquiring this area. We won't be stopped by archaeological fantasies." "Then let me be clear," Maya said, her voice carrying the strength of generations. This land isn't for sale, not to you, not to anyone. These artifacts belong to the Cherokee people, and they'll stay with the Cherokee people. After Victoria stormed off, Maya found herself shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Sarah approached with her camera, having documented the entire confrontation. "Mom, this is going viral. The video of you standing up to them, people are calling you a hero." Maya looked at her daughter, seeing not just pride, but a new confidence. Sarah had started the summer as a shy college student, unsure of her heritage. Now she was helping to rewrite history, documenting discoveries that proved her ancestors' sophistication. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. James Crawford knocked on her trailer door, holding a covered dish and wearing an expression Maya had never seen before. Nervous anticipation mixed with something like hope. "Maya, I know you're busy with all this archaeology business, but I wanted to talk to you about something." He fidgeted with his hat. "About your land, but not what you think." Maya invited him inside, curious about her neighbor's sudden discomfort. "See, my family's been farming the property next to yours for 4 generations. My great-grandfather bought it from a man who bought it real cheap in the 1830s, if you know what I mean." He paused, studying his hands. "Found something when I was a boy that I never told anyone about." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cloth bundle. When he unwrapped it, Maya gasped. Inside was a silver medallion covered in Cherokee syllabary, attached to a beaded necklace that looked ancient but perfectly preserved. "Found it in our old root cellar, wrapped up just like this. My daddy told me to forget about it. Said it would just cause trouble. But watching what you're doing, seeing how you're honoring the Cherokee people." He held it out to Maya. "I think this belongs with you. With them." Dr. Crowfeather later identified the medallion as a leadership token, possibly belonging to one of the Cherokee families who had hidden artifacts on Maya's land. The beadwork contained encoded geographical markers, a map to other cache locations. "This is why the Blackthornes are so desperate," Dr. Strongbear explained. "They don't just know about your land, they know about the others." The Cherokee created a network of hidden vaults throughout their original territory. You're sitting on one piece of a massive puzzle. That night, Maya called a family meeting. Her children, the archaeological team, Cherokee Nation representatives, and now several neighboring farmers who had come forward with their own stories gathered around the excavation site. "We need to talk about what happens next," Maya began. "The Blackthornes aren't going to stop. They're going to get more aggressive, more desperate. You all need to know what you're signing up for." 16-year-old Michael stood up first. "Mom, remember what great-great-grandma Rosa used to say? The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. This is bigger than just us. This is about every Cherokee kid who grows up thinking their ancestors were primitive." Sarah nodded vigorously. "The whole world needs to see these artifacts. Not in some rich person's private collection, but where Cherokee people can access them, study them, learn from them." Dr. Strongbear shared the latest archaeological findings. The teaching chamber had revealed that the Cherokee had developed a mathematical system that included concepts European mathematicians wouldn't discover for centuries. The astronomical calculations suggested knowledge that could only have come from systematic observation over generations. "Your ancestors weren't just preserving objects," she explained. "They were preserving entire fields of knowledge. This site could revolutionize our understanding of indigenous science and mathematics." The group spent hours planning. The Cherokee Nation would fast-track the federal protection process. International indigenous rights organizations would provide support. Academic institutions would contribute funding and expertise. But Also prepared for escalation from Blackthorne Acquisitions. Sarah Wolf Dancer outlined legal strategies to counter harassment. Dr. Crowfeather contacted other tribes whose territories had been taken by the Blackthorne family, suggesting a coordinated response to decades of exploitation. 3 days later, Maya woke to find a convoy of vehicles approaching her land. But these weren't Blackthorne representatives. They were Cherokee Nation Security, federal marshals, and representatives from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Special Agent Rebecca Thunderheart from the BIA explained that their investigation had uncovered a pattern of harassment and intimidation. Ms. Thompson, you're not alone in this. Federal law protects archaeological sites of cultural significance, and we take violations of those protections very seriously. The federal recognition transformed everything. Media attention exploded as journalists realized they were witnessing not just an archaeological discovery, but a confrontation between old extractive practices and new models of indigenous empowerment. Maya found herself interviewed by news teams from around the world, standing beside the excavation where her ancestors had hidden their greatest treasures. She spoke with a clarity that surprised even herself. This site proves what Cherokee people have always known, that our ancestors were not primitive, not savage, not inferior. They were brilliant scientists, master craftsmen, sophisticated astronomers. These artifacts are their message to us. Remember who you were so you can become who you're meant to be. The interview footage became a rallying cry for indigenous communities worldwide. Remember who you were began trending globally as people shared their own stories of reclaimed heritage and cultural pride. But Blackthorne Acquisitions wasn't finished. Harrison Blackthorne himself appeared on financial news programs, claiming that outside agitators were disrupting legitimate business development with unsubstantiated historical fantasies. His words backfired spectacularly when Dr. Gonzalez released her preliminary findings to the scientific community. Peer reviews confirmed what the Cherokee had known all along. The astronomical calculations were accurate to a degree that seemed impossible for their supposed time period. The revelation triggered a re-evaluation of pre-Columbian American history. Universities rewrote curriculum. Museums reconsidered their narrative about indigenous peoples. The Cherokee site became the catalyst for recognizing indigenous scientific achievements that had been systematically ignored or denied. Maya's youngest, 10-year-old Alex, asked the question that no one else had considered. "Mom, if the Cherokee people were this smart, how come everyone always said they weren't?" The answer came from unexpected directions. Historians revealed how Blackthorne family documents dating to the 1830s specifically instructed that Cherokee innovations be attributed to European influence or explained away as impossible. Archaeological sites had been deliberately destroyed or misreported to maintain narratives of indigenous primitiveness. The Blackthornes didn't just steal land, Dr. Crowfeather explained. They stole history. They've spent 2 centuries making sure no one knew how advanced Cherokee civilization really was. This historical manipulation explained Blackthorne Acquisitions' desperation. The site didn't just threaten their current plans. It threatened the foundational myth that had justified their family's wealth for generations. As excavations continued, each discovery reinforced the Cherokee's scientific sophistication. A calendar stone accurate enough to predict eclipses for the next millennium. Metallurgy techniques that produced alloys modern scientists struggled to reproduce. Mathematical theorems carved in stone that paralleled discoveries attributed to ancient Greeks. The financial offers from Blackthorne increased in parallel with the revelations. 1 million, 5 million, 10 million. Each rejection seemed to drive them toward more desperate measures. Security cameras that Maya had never noticed began appearing on neighboring properties. Cherokee Nation Security reported vehicles following their team members. Local officials suddenly discovered code violations requiring expensive, immediate fixes, violations that hadn't existed the previous week. But Maya had something Blackthorne couldn't buy: community support. Farmers like James Crawford began sharing stories passed down through generations. Local business owners offered free services to the archaeological team. Even the mayor of Meadowbrook, previously neutral, publicly endorsed the preservation effort. "This discovery is putting our community on the map for all the right reasons," she declared at a town hall meeting. "We're not going to let corporate bullies destroy something this significant." The community rallying point became clear one evening when Alex came home from school upset. "Mom, kids are saying that Blackthorne's going to close down the whole excavation, that we're going to lose everything." That night, Maya organized something unprecedented: a community viewing of the artifacts. Cherokee Nation representatives agreed to display selected pieces under carefully controlled conditions, allowing local residents to see what had been hidden beneath their feet for over a century. Over 300 people showed up. Farmers who had never shown interest in archaeology stood in silent awe before star charts that mapped the cosmos with impossible precision. School children touched pottery shards that proved their Cherokee. Classmates descended from brilliant scientists. Elderly residents wept as they recognized symbols their Cherokee grandparents had traced in the sand but never explained. The most powerful moment came when Dorothy Littlefoot, a 90-year-old Cherokee woman who had been told her whole life that her ancestors had no written language, held a tablet covered in Cherokee syllabary and read aloud the words her great-grandfather had carved in stone. "For those who come after us, remember that knowledge is the only treasure that multiplies when shared." Mayor Johnson stood before the crowd that night and made an announcement that sent Blackthorne representatives hurrying to their cars. The town of Meadowbrook officially designates this site as a protected cultural landmark. "We'll fight any development that threatens these archaeological treasures." The federal recognition, combined with local support and international attention, created a protective barrier around the site. But it also made one thing clear: this wasn't just about Maya's 75 acres anymore. This was about centuries of stolen history, suppressed truth, and the power of indigenous knowledge to transform how the world understood American history. Maya stood that night, beneath stars her Cherokee ancestors had mapped with breathtaking accuracy, surrounded by artifacts worth millions, but valued far beyond any monetary measure. She thought about Rosa's stories, about the land's curse that turned out to be its greatest blessing, about how worthless ground could hold the most priceless treasures. Her phone buzzed with messages from around the world: indigenous communities celebrating, scientists requesting collaboration opportunities, museums offering exhibitions that would keep artifacts in Cherokee control. The simple woman who had inherited worthless land was becoming the guardian of a revolution in historical understanding. As she prepared for sleep in her trailer, Maya heard Sarah reading to her younger brothers from the Cherokee Journal. The words seemed to echo across centuries. What they called magic, we called science. What they called primitive, we called perfection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Blackthorne wouldn't give up easily, and protecting the site would require constant vigilance. But tonight, surrounded by proof of Cherokee brilliance and supported by a community that now understood what was at stake, Maya felt the strength of her ancestors flowing through her. The cursed land had revealed its true nature, not cursed, but sacred, not worthless, but priceless beyond measure. And Maya Thompson, keeper of Cherokee treasures, was just getting started. The federal investigation into Blackthorne Acquisitions had officially begun. Special Agent Thunderheart arrived at Maya's property with a team of federal investigators, forensic accountants, and archaeological specialists. Their preliminary findings revealed a pattern of fraud extending far beyond Maya's case. "Ms. Thompson," What you've uncovered here has opened the door to one of the largest cultural crimes investigations in U.S. history, Agent Thunderheart explained. We've identified over 40 sites across the southeast where Blackthorne knowingly destroyed or concealed archaeological evidence. Dr. Strongbear presented new translations from additional Cherokee documents found at the site. The revelations were staggering. The Cherokee had not only developed advanced astronomical science, but had created a sophisticated legal system for protecting intellectual property, concepts they shared with other indigenous nations through formal alliance networks. This alliance system, Dr. Strongbear explained to the assembled team, connected Cherokee scientists with Mayan astronomers, Mississippian engineers, and Arctic navigators. They had established what we would recognize today as international scientific research consortiums. The implications rippled through academic institutions worldwide. Harvard University immediately announced the creation of the first indigenous science department, with Maya as the proposed founding director. The Smithsonian offered to return all Cherokee artifacts unconditionally, requesting only the opportunity to create a permanent exhibition space designed and curated entirely by Cherokee experts. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Robert Blackthorne, Harrison's son, and a respected archaeologist who had spent 20 years deliberately working in regions far from Cherokee territory, arrived at the site unannounced. "Miss Thompson," he said, removing his hat respectfully, "I've spent my entire career trying to escape my family's legacy. When I heard about your discovery, I realized I couldn't run anymore." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "This is my great-great-grandfather's actual diary from 1838, the one my family claimed was lost. It documents not just the land thefts, but the systematic destruction of Cherokee archaeological sites. He knew exactly what he was destroying." The diary entries were damning. Hamilton Blackthorne had written extensively about preventing the Indians from proving their civilization equals ours. He had ordered the destruction of Cherokee libraries, the concealment of advanced artifacts, and the spreading of misinformation about Cherokee capabilities. One entry particularly stood out. "Today, destroyed what the Cherokee called their star stone houses, buildings aligned with celestial movements that would shame our European architects. Cannot allow evidence of their sophistication to reach Washington. The narrative of savage primitives must be maintained to justify our acquisitions." Dr. Robert Blackthorne's revelation created a firestorm. Major news networks picked up the story, and public opinion turned decisively against Blackthorne Acquisitions. Harrison Blackthorne found himself facing not just civil lawsuits, but criminal charges for cultural destruction and fraud. Maya received an invitation that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The President of the United States requested her presence at the White House for a formal ceremony acknowledging the Cherokee people's historical mistreatment and celebrating their scientific achievements. Standing in the Rose Garden, with her 3 children beside her and Cherokee leaders from across the nation in attendance, Maya listened as the President spoke about the need to reckon with our full history, the painful truths alongside the celebrated triumphs. The discovery on Maya Thompson's land has proven what Cherokee people have always known, that their ancestors were not conquered by a superior civilization, but by superior weaponry and legal manipulation. Today, we begin the process of setting the historical record straight. The President announced the creation of the National Indigenous Heritage Preservation Act, legislation that would provide federal protection for all identified indigenous archaeological sites and establish funding for cultural preservation programs. But the ceremony that meant the most to Maya came later, back home in Tennessee. Elder Joseph Crow Feather, now the oldest living Cherokee speaker at 92, presided over a traditional ceremony at the stone circle. As the sacred fire crackled, in the twilight, he spoke in Cherokee about the responsibility that came with such a discovery. Dr. Strong Bear translated his words. He says that our ancestors preserved this knowledge not just for Cherokee people, but for all humanity. They knew that wisdom belongs to everyone who approaches it with respect and humility. The archaeological work had expanded beyond Maya's original property. Using ground-penetrating radar and the location codes from various Cherokee artifacts, Dr. Patel's team had identified 17 additional sites within a 50-mile radius. Each promised new revelations about Cherokee science and technology. At Site 7, they discovered what appeared to be an ancient Cherokee observatory, stone structures precisely aligned to track not just the sun and moon, but multiple planetary movements. The sophistication rivaled European observatories built centuries later. Site 12 revealed Cherokee medical knowledge preserved in carved stone tablets. The treatments described included surgical procedures, pharmacological preparations, and therapeutic techniques that anticipated modern medical discoveries by hundreds of years. Perhaps most remarkably, Site 15 contained what Cherokee scholars identified as their first university, a complex of buildings where young Cherokee came to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. The curriculum, carved in stone, would have been advanced for any university in medieval Europe. Maya found herself traveling constantly, consulting with indigenous communities who were finding the courage to reveal their own hidden knowledge. The Hopi shared stone tablets with astronomical calculations. The Inca descended from families who had preserved mathematical texts in sealed caves. Arctic peoples produced star maps that matched Cherokee calculations with stunning precision. The global implications of these revelations were staggering. Universities began revising their curricula to include indigenous science. Medical schools incorporated traditional healing wisdom. Engineering programs studied pre-Columbian architectural techniques. But for Maya, the most meaningful developments happened closer to home. Sarah had organized a youth archaeology program that brought Cherokee children to the sites every summer. Watching 12-year-old Cherokee kids carefully excavating artifacts left by their ancestors, learning that their heritage included brilliant scientists and mathematicians, transformed their sense of identity. Before this, explained 15-year-old Tommy Littlefoot, Dorothy's great-grandson, Cherokee history class was all about removal and suffering. Now we know our ancestors were inventing things, solving problems, teaching the world about science. It changes how you see yourself. The legal battles with Blackthorne Acquisitions continued, but the tide had turned decisively. Victoria Blackthorne, facing charges of archaeological vandalism and historical document destruction, agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for reduced sentences. Her testimony revealed the extent of the cover-up. For generations, the Blackthorne family had systematically located Cherokee cache sites, extracted valuable artifacts for private sale, and destroyed evidence of Cherokee scientific achievements. They had sold millions of dollars worth of Cherokee artifacts to private collectors and foreign buyers. We were told it was protecting American history from Indian myths, Victoria testified. My family genuinely believed that Cherokee scientific achievements were impossible, that any evidence had to be explained away or hidden. The recovered artifacts were astounding. Cherokee astronomical devices that predated European equivalents by centuries. Mathematical tablets that solved equations not addressed in Europe for another 200 years. Medical instruments that suggested surgical techniques of remarkable sophistication. As the legal cases concluded, Harrison Blackthorne made a decision that shocked everyone, including his own family. He liquidated Blackthorne Acquisitions entirely, using the proceeds to establish a massive reparations fund for Cherokee Nation and other indigenous communities affected by his family's historical crimes. "My great-great-grandfather built our fortune on theft and lies," he announced at a press conference. "I'm dismantling that fortune to fund truth and restoration." The Blackthorne Cherokee Restoration Foundation became the largest indigenous education and cultural preservation fund in history. It provided full scholarships for Cherokee students to any American university, funded language preservation programs, and supported archaeological research across former Cherokee territory. Maya found herself offered the position of executive director. After much consideration and consultation with Cherokee elders, she accepted, with one condition: the foundation would be governed entirely by Cherokee Nation representatives, with the Blackthorne family holding only advisory positions. 2 years after the first discoveries, Maya stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. She'd been invited to address the body about indigenous rights and the preservation of traditional knowledge. "For centuries," she began, "indigenous peoples have been told that our ancestors were primitive, that our traditional knowledge was superstition, that our scientific achievements were impossible. The discoveries on Cherokee land have proven these claims to be not just wrong, but deliberately false." She paused, looking out at representatives from 193 nations. When Cherokee astronomers calculated eclipses with perfect accuracy, when they developed mathematical theorems that wouldn't appear in European universities for another 800 years, when they created sustainable agricultural systems that fed large populations without environmental damage, they weren't being lucky. They weren't copying from elsewhere. They were being brilliant. The speech led to the unanimous passage of the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Scientific Heritage, establishing international protections for traditional knowledge and requiring nations to acknowledge indigenous scientific contributions. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred in Maya herself. The woman who had started as a night custodian and truck stop waitress had become an internationally recognized advocate for indigenous rights. Universities offered her honorary doctorates. Governments sought her counsel on cultural preservation policies. Yet Maya remained grounded in the values that had guided her through the initial discovery. She still lived in a modest house on the original site, still worked alongside the archaeological teams, still spent evenings teaching Cherokee youth about their heritage. Sarah, now completing her PhD in indigenous archaeology at Harvard, returned home for the 3rd anniversary of the discovery. She found her mother sitting at the stone circle, watching the sunset. "Mom, you've changed the world," Sarah said, sitting beside her. Maya smiled, picking up a piece of pottery that had become her talisman. "I didn't change anything, baby girl. I just uncovered what was already there. The brilliance was always present. It just needed someone willing to look past what everyone expected to see." As if responding to her words, the evening sky exploded with the aurora borealis, a rare occurrence so far south. The Cherokee had believed the northern lights carried messages from ancestors, and tonight the message seemed clear. The truth had been unveiled, the knowledge preserved, the dignity restored. Dr. Strongbear approached with news that made Maya's heart race. "We've deciphered more of the location codes. There are sites we haven't found yet, possibly dozens of them. This could continue for generations." Maya nodded, feeling both excitement and responsibility. The 17-year-old girl in Cherokee Nation's education program had asked her that morning how long she planned to continue the work. "As long as it takes," Maya had answered. "As long as there are truths buried by lies. As long as there are stories silenced by those who feared their power. As long as there are ancestors waiting for their children to remember who they really were." The night sounds of Tennessee surrounded them, cricket songs that Cherokee astronomers had used as timing devices, owl calls that had signaled the start of ceremonies, the whisper of wind through grass that had once bent beneath the feet of Cherokee scientists. Maya stood, brushing dust from her jeans, and looked toward the museum building where tomorrow's visitors would learn that indigenous peoples hadn't just survived in America. They had thrived, innovated, and achieved greatness that had been systematically erased from history books. The worthless land had become the most valuable archaeological site in North America. The simple woman who inherited it had become a voice for every indigenous community whose achievements had been stolen or denied. But most importantly, the cursed ground everyone had avoided had been revealed as blessed earth, holding the proof that indigenous brilliance hadn't just existed, it had shaped the world in ways that were only beginning to be understood. As Maya headed home, she passed the bronze marker that had been installed that year. It read, "On this site, Maya Thompson uncovered proof that Cherokee ancestors were master scientists, skilled mathematicians, and sophisticated astronomers. Their knowledge was hidden, but never lost, waiting for the right time and the right person to bring it back to light." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Political forces that had profited from indigenous marginalization weren't giving up easily. There were other families like the Blackthornes, other buried histories waiting to be exposed. But tonight, Maya felt the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and destiny embraced. Her great-grandmother Rosa's stories had led her home, not just to the land, but to a truth that was reshaping how the world understood indigenous peoples. The Cherokee had been keepers of knowledge that defied every stereotype about primitive peoples. They had been teachers whose lessons were only now being learned. They had been visionaries whose sight had extended across centuries. And Maya Thompson, once called a simple woman who had inherited worthless land, had become the guardian of their legacy. Proof that in the right hands, the most unlikely inheritance could change the world forever. The stars wheel above Cherokee country as they had for millennia, their patterns mapped by astronomers whose sophistication modern science was only beginning to appreciate. And beneath those stars, artifacts continued their patient wait to be discovered, holding secrets that would transform humanity's understanding of its own history. The simple woman's story had become legend. The worthless land had proven priceless, and the cursed ground had revealed itself as sacred space where truth had been preserved, waiting for its moment to transform the world. 10 years had passed since Maya Thompson's discovery transformed not just her own life, but the entire understanding of Cherokee civilization. What began as an archaeological site had evolved into something unprecedented, the Native American Scientific Heritage Center, a sprawling educational complex that had become one of the most visited cultural institutions in the South. Maya, now 44, stood on the observation deck of the center's main building, watching as groups of students from around the world explored the interactive exhibits below. The original excavation site remained at the heart of the complex, protected under a glass dome that allowed visitors to witness ongoing archaeological work while preserving the sacred nature of the space. The transformation had been remarkable. Where once there had been barren farmland, thriving gardens now showcased plants the Cherokee had cultivated for centuries, including varieties thought extinct until seeds were discovered in the sealed vaults. The astronomy pavilion housed replicas of the Cherokee star charts alongside modern telescopes, allowing visitors to verify the accuracy of predictions made centuries ago. But perhaps the most profound change was in the people themselves. Maya's children had grown into roles she never could have imagined. Sarah, now 28, had completed her doctorate in archaeology and served as the center's director of research. She had established partnership programs with over 40 indigenous communities worldwide, helping them document and preserve their own scientific traditions. Michael, 26, had studied both Cherokee traditions and modern engineering, developing sustainable technologies based on ancient Cherokee innovations. His work on water management systems derived from pre-Columbian designs had revolutionized drought-resistant agriculture across 3 continents. Alex, now 20, was following in Dr. Strongbear's footsteps, working toward degrees in both anthropology and mathematics. They spent their summers leading programs that taught Cherokee mathematical concepts to students who'd been told their entire lives that advanced mathematics was a Western invention. The financial success had exceeded all projections. The Heritage Center generated over $200 million annually in tourism revenue, directly funding Cherokee education programs, language preservation initiatives, and archaeological research. Every Cherokee child could now attend college free of charge through the foundation established with artifact revenues. New Cherokee language immersion schools had opened in 12 states, but success had brought unexpected challenges. Nations around the world now wanted Maya to help them reclaim their own suppressed histories. Indigenous communities from Australia to Siberia sought her guidance in establishing similar heritage centers. The workload was overwhelming, requiring Maya to travel constantly for consultations and planning sessions. On this particular morning, Maya was preparing for perhaps her most significant challenge yet: the opening of the International Indigenous Knowledge Symposium, which would bring together indigenous scientists, traditional knowledge keepers, and modern researchers from 53 countries. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the center's director of international programs, joined Maya on the observation deck. A descendant of Inca astronomers, Elena had been recruited 3 years earlier to help expand the center's global mission. The delegations from the Arctic Council arrived last night, Elena reported. They're particularly excited about presenting their ice astronomy traditions, and the delegation from New Zealand brought actual Maori star maps that match some of the Cherokee calculations. Maya nodded, still amazed by how the discovery of Cherokee artifacts had unlocked similar revelations worldwide. As communities saw Cherokee science being celebrated and respected, they had begun sharing their own long-hidden knowledge. "Any word from Dr. Lightfeet's team?" Maya asked about the archaeological expedition currently working in former Cherokee territory. "In Georgia. Incredible news, actually. They've confirmed 3 more cache sites using the location codes from your original medallion. One site appears to contain Cherokee medical texts that could revolutionize our understanding of traditional healing practices." The network of hidden Cherokee vaults had proven even more extensive than originally believed. The medallion James Crawford had revealed on Maya's land was one of several master keys, each pointing to different regions of the Cherokee homeland. Over the past decade, 27 sites had been discovered, each containing artifacts that challenged conventional historical narratives. Maya's phone buzzed with a call from Sarah Wolf Dancer, the lawyer who had been instrumental in protecting the sites from the beginning. "Maya, we've got news about Blackthorne. Harrison's finally agreed to the federal mediation process." This was the conversation Maya had been waiting for, after a decade of legal battles, public relations disasters, and mounting evidence of historical wrongdoing. Blackthorne Acquisitions was finally ready to negotiate. The company had fought the Cherokee claims through every possible channel, but the weight of evidence had become impossible to ignore. "He wants to meet tomorrow," Sarah continued. "Full mediation panel, federal oversight. This could finally resolve everything." Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her wanted justice for nearly 2 centuries of exploitation, but another part, shaped by Cherokee traditions of reconciliation and healing, hoped for something more transformative. The symposium opening ceremony that evening was unlike anything Maya could have imagined when she first inherited her worthless land. Scientists, artists, educators, and spiritual leaders from indigenous communities worldwide gathered in the center's main amphitheater, which had been designed to incorporate Cherokee architectural principles with modern technology. Maya stepped to the podium as the sunset painted the Tennessee hills in brilliant oranges and purples, the same hills where her ancestors had walked, where they had observed the stars and calculated celestial movements with breathtaking precision. 10 years ago, she began, I inherited 75 acres of land that everyone said was worthless. Tonight we celebrate not just what was found beneath that soil, but what has grown from those discoveries. She paused, looking out at faces that represented hundreds of indigenous communities. Our ancestors didn't just hide artifacts, they hid proof that indigenous knowledge is not primitive, not superseded by modern science, but foundational to it. They hid evidence that collaboration, not competition, was the true source of innovation. The audience rose in sustained applause as Maya continued. This center exists not just to preserve the past, but to ensure that indigenous knowledge shapes the future. When Cherokee astronomers accurately predicted eclipses centuries before European contact, they weren't performing magic, they were doing science. When Inuit communities developed ice-based engineering that modern Arctic researchers are only now beginning to understand, they weren't being primitive, they were being brilliant. Dr. Kamehelihiwa, a Hawaiian historian, took the stage next, presenting research that connected Cherokee star maps to Polynesian navigation traditions. What we're discovering is a global network of indigenous scientific traditions that were far more connected than colonizers wanted us to believe. The Cherokee calculations match our own traditional astronomy with precision that suggests systematic knowledge exchange. The symposium sessions that followed were revolutionary. Presentations revealed how traditional Aboriginal Australian fire management techniques could address climate change, how Andean agricultural terracing could solve modern food security. Issues how Cherokee metallurgy could influence sustainable manufacturing. But the most powerful moments came during the cultural exchanges, when children from the Cherokee Immersion School sang traditional songs that contained encoded mathematical formulas. Delegates wept. When Maori elders demonstrated star navigation techniques that paralleled Cherokee methods, the connections across ocean became undeniable. The following morning brought the long-awaited mediation session with Blackthorne Acquisitions. The federal building in Nashville had been secured for the proceedings, with representatives from the Cherokee Nation, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Justice Department, and multiple indigenous rights organizations present. Harrison Blackthorne entered the room, looking older than his 70 years, accompanied by a team of lawyers who seemed less confident than usual. The decade of legal challenges, public relations disasters, and failed attempts to discredit the archaeological findings had taken their toll. Federal mediator Judge Patricia Running Horse, herself of Lakota descent, opened the proceedings with a statement that set the tone. We're here to address not just current disputes, but nearly 2 centuries of documented injustice. The goal is not punishment, but restoration and healing. Sarah Wolf Dancer presented the Cherokee Nation's position with devastating effectiveness. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents proving that Hamilton Blackthorne had deliberately misrepresented Cherokee land values, correspondence showing awareness of archaeological sites that were systematically destroyed, and contracts demonstrating fraudulent foreclosure practices that had dispossessed Cherokee families of millions of acres. The Cherokee Nation doesn't seek revenge, she stated clearly. We seek acknowledgement, restoration, and commitment to change. Harrison Blackthorne's response surprised everyone. Instead of the combative stance they expected, he spoke with what seemed like genuine remorse. My family built our fortune on theft and lies. I've spent the last decade trying to deny that truth, to justify actions that cannot be justified. He paused, his voice becoming stronger. But I've also witnessed what Ms. Thompson and the Cherokee Nation have created. The Heritage Center, the educational programs, the celebration of indigenous knowledge. It's everything my ancestors tried to destroy. He turned to Maya directly. I've seen my great-great-grandfather's diaries. I know what he did, how he specifically targeted Cherokee families, how he destroyed evidence of their achievements. I cannot undo that history, but I can acknowledge it and try to make amends. The room was silent as Blackthorne continued. Blackthorne Acquisitions formally acknowledges the Cherokee Nation's legitimate historical claims to our holdings throughout the former Cherokee territory. We propose transferring all disputed properties to Cherokee control, establishing a $2 billion restoration fund, and creating a joint foundation to support indigenous education worldwide. Maya felt her worldview shifting. This wasn't just about legal settlements or financial reparations. This was about transformation, about the possibility that even longtime adversaries could choose healing over hatred. Judge Running Horse leaned forward. Mr. Blackthorne, are you prepared to make these commitments formal and legally binding? I am, and more than that, I want to publicly acknowledge what the Blackthorne family has hidden for generations. The Cherokee people we claimed were primitive had developed scientific and mathematical knowledge that surpassed anything in Europe. We didn't just steal their land, we stole credit for their innovations and spread lies about their capabilities. The negotiations continued for days, working out details of land transfers, educational partnerships, and oversight mechanisms. But the breakthrough had already occurred. By acknowledging historical truth and committing to systemic change, Blackthorne Acquisitions had chosen a path that went beyond legal requirements toward genuine reconciliation. Maya found herself in private conversation with Harrison Blackthorne during a break. "What changed?" she asked directly. "Why now, after fighting us for so long?" Blackthorne considered the question carefully. "My grandson started attending your Cherokee immersion school 3 years ago. When I saw him learning Cherokee mathematics, understanding concepts that weren't invented in Europe for centuries, I couldn't maintain the lies anymore." He smiled sadly. A 9-year-old boy teaching his grandfather calculus in Cherokee. That's a powerful force for honesty. The final agreement was signed under Cherokee sunrise ceremonies conducted by Elder Joseph Crow Feather, now in his 80s but still sharp as ever. As sacred smoke rose in the morning air, Maya felt the presence of her ancestors, their approval of what had been accomplished, but also their reminder that the work was far from over. 5 years later, the transformation was complete. The Cherokee Scientific Heritage Network now encompassed 57 sites across the former Cherokee Nation, each one a working archaeological site, educational center, and research facility. The joint foundation with Blackthorne had established similar centers for 36 other indigenous communities worldwide. Maya, now approaching 50, had been named the first Director General of the United Nations Indigenous Knowledge Council, a position created specifically to recognize and protect traditional scientific wisdom. But she still lived in Tennessee, on the land where it all began, in a modest house built overlooking the original excavation site. Her children had become global leaders in their own right. Sarah was developing virtual reality programs that allowed anyone to experience Cherokee. Star navigation techniques. Michael's sustainable technology company was revolutionizing how traditional indigenous innovations were translated into modern solutions. Alex had just published a mathematical text that taught Cherokee numerical concepts alongside quantum physics. On the 15th anniversary of the discovery, Maya stood once again at the stone circle where her story had begun. Thousands of people gathered for the celebration: Cherokee descendants, international scientists, students from the heritage schools, and representatives from indigenous communities worldwide. Elder Dorothy Littlefoot, now 105 and still sharp, offered a blessing in Cherokee. Maya translated her words. She says that our ancestors hid these treasures not from fear, but from hope. Hope that someday their children's children would be strong enough to reclaim not just the artifacts, but the truth they represented. Dr. Strongbear, now the head of the International Indigenous Archaeology Consortium, presented findings that still amazed the world. The Cherokee network of sacred sites contained over 2,000 unique artifacts, representing scientific achievements that predated European contact by centuries, mathematical calculations that enabled architectural marvels, medical knowledge that had saved lives when translated into modern treatments, environmental management techniques that offered solutions to climate change. But beyond the artifacts themselves, the discovery had triggered a global renaissance of indigenous knowledge recognition. Universities now offered degrees in traditional ecological science. Medical schools taught courses in indigenous healing practices. Engineering programs studied traditional construction techniques. The Nobel Prize Committee had created new categories recognizing traditional knowledge contributions to modern science. As the celebration continued into the night, Maya found herself surrounded by the next generation, Cherokee children who spoke their language fluently, who understood their history with pride, who saw themselves as inheritors of a brilliant scientific tradition. Non-native children who had learned to respectfully appreciate indigenous knowledge. Young people from around the world who came to the heritage centers as pilgrims, seeking wisdom that connected ancient knowledge with future possibilities. Harrison Blackthorne, now in his 80s, approached with his grandson, the Cherokee student who had helped change his perspective. "Ms. Thompson, I wanted to thank you again, not just for agreeing to the reconciliation process, but for showing us a different way forward." Maya smiled, seeing in the old man's eyes the same transformation she'd witnessed in countless others. "Mr. Blackthorne, we've all learned that healing serves everyone better than hatred. Your family's acknowledgement and commitment to change has done more good than any amount of punishment could have." She looked around at the celebration, at faces illuminated by both electric lights and traditional fires, at the harmony that had grown from conflict. "My great-grandmother used to say that the land remembers everything, the good and the bad. But she also taught me that the earth is always ready to grow something new, if we're willing to plant different seeds." The evening concluded with a special presentation. Sarah announced that archaeological teams had discovered new cache sites, containing Cherokee agricultural texts that could revolutionize sustainable farming. Michael revealed plans for a global network of indigenous innovation labs. Alex shared research showing how traditional Cherokee mathematical concepts were advancing quantum computing. But the most powerful announcement came from Maya herself. She had decided to establish the Rosa Thompson Institute, named for her great-grandmother, dedicated to collecting and preserving indigenous oral histories from around the world. The institute would ensure that no knowledge would be lost as elders passed away. Every story our ancestors told, every innovation they developed, every piece of wisdom they preserved, it all matters, Maya declared. This institute will use modern technology to preserve ancient knowledge, creating bridges between past and future. As the celebrants dispersed, many staying to camp beneath the stars their Cherokee ancestors had mapped, Maya remained at the original stone circle. She thought about the journey from that first day when everyone called this land worthless, to now when it anchored a global movement for indigenous knowledge recognition. Her phone lit up with messages from around the world. Indigenous communities, sharing their own discovery stories. Students thanking her for inspirational programs, researchers proposing new collaborations. The worthless farmland had become the center of a network that spanned continents and cultures. Maya picked up a piece of pottery from the original excavation, feeling the smoothness that spoke of master craftsmanship, seeing the intricate patterns that encoded astronomical data. She thought about the Cherokee artists who had created this piece, about their hope that someday their descendants would understand its significance. "Thank you," she whispered to ancestors who couldn't hear her but whose wisdom still guided her daily decisions. "Thank you for hiding so much, for hoping so much, for believing that truth would eventually win." Above her, stars wheeled in patterns the Cherokee had mapped centuries ago. The worthless land had revealed its true nature as a repository of priceless knowledge. The simple woman who had inherited it had become the guardian of a revolution that was still spreading across the globe. Maya Thompson smiled as she headed back to her house, past gardens where Cherokee Three Sisters plantings grew beside experimental plots, testing traditional techniques with modern crops. Past laboratories where Cherokee medical techs informed cutting-edge research. Past classrooms where children learned that their ancestors were not primitive, but brilliant. The cursed land had become blessed ground. The worthless inheritance had proven invaluable beyond measure. And the simple woman who had remembered her great-grandmother's stories had helped the world remember truths that had been hidden too long. As she prepared for sleep, Maya could hear the night sounds of Tennessee, crickets and owls that her Cherokee ancestors had listened to as they conducted their scientific observations. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, new challenges, new opportunities to share indigenous wisdom with the world. The story that began with a worthless inheritance had become a legend of transformation, proof that with courage, community, and respect for ancestral wisdom, even the most unlikely person could change the world. And the best part was, this was just the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.